In the dust-choked libraries of old Nishapur, a wandering physician alchemist named Ibn Zahir left a note in the margin of a scorched manuscript. Not a spell, not a prayer. A warning. Do not seek the sun in the sky. Seek it where your grief tightens. The line appears again in different hands, different centuries, rewarded, disguised as poetry, hidden inside diagrams of circles within circles. A sun that never rises in the east. A fire that does eat its fuel. A light that feels older than your biography. They called it the king in exile, the red sulfur, the secret lamp. But the location never changes. The cave behind the sternum, that quiet pressure you feel when you were ashamed, when you crave, when you lie to yourself and still believe it. And here is the problem. If that inner sun wakes, it does improve your life. It rearranges your identity. It burns habits the way flame burns paper, without negotiating. The old masters did describe humans as people. They described us as workshops, portable laboratories where the same laws that move stars also move addictions, fear loops, and self-sabotage. Ibn Zahir wrote that most of us live like a city at night. Buildings standing, streets functioning, but no central power grid. We survive on flickers, mood, impulse, routine. Yet the true generator stays buried. In their doctrine, there were three living forces, not beliefs, operators. Salt, the fixed shell. Your body, your schedule, your habits, the rituals that keep you stable, but also keep you stuck. Mercury, the volatile messenger. Thoughts, emotions, fantasies, the endless weather system of the psyche. Sulfur, the igniting principle. The inner fire that doesn't merely change you, it alchemizes you. And here's the brutal insight. Most bad habits are not moral failures. They are salt trying to stay solid while Mercury panics. Scrolling, sugar, porn, rage, overthinking. They are anesthesia for the moment sulfur starts to heat the chamber. When sulfur stirs, the ego calls it danger. The mystics called it initiation. The Persian mystics had a ruthless way of explaining this awakening. In a forgotten commentary on a Sufi poem, the sage Hakim Sadr al-Din tells a small story about three travelers who discovered a strange fire burning in the desert at night. The first traveler approached cautiously. He extended his hands toward the warmth, studied the color of the flames, then returned to the camp full of enthusiasm. I understand the fire now, he declared. He wrote poems about it, described its beauty, debated its philosophy, yet he never stepped closer. The second traveler went further. He approached the blaze until sparks burned the edge of his robe. He felt the heat sharply, panicked, and leapt back into the darkness. The fire is powerful, he warned the others, but it is dangerous. Respect it from a distance. But the third traveler did something different. He walked forward without announcing anything, stepped into the center of the flames, and vanished. When the others looked for him, they found no body, only light. Sadr al-Din wrote a single line beneath the story. Only the one who becomes the fire understands it. Psychology eventually rediscovered what the mystics encoded in parables. Carl Jung observed that every person carries within them a hidden counter-self, what he famously called the shadow. Not a demon, not a monster, but the entire archive of traits the ego refused to acknowledge. Your aggression, your envy, your forbidden desires, even your buried talents. Every time society taught you this part of you is unacceptable, that energy did disappear. It moved underground. Jung noticed something disturbing. The more people tried to appear virtuous, rational, or spiritually advanced, the larger and darker this hidden reservoir became. The alchemists had a name for this stage long before psychology existed. They called it nigredo, the blackening. In the laboratory, it looked like rot, smoke, decomposition. The material had to decay before gold could emerge. In the psyche, it looks different. Nigredo appears as confusion, loss of meaning, compulsive habits, emotional storms, the feeling that something inside you is collapsing. But the masters insisted on a paradox. This darkness is not failure. It is the furnace finally turning on. To explain this stage, the wandering poet Nizam al-Khorasani told a story his students never forgot. One evening, a young apprentice complained while stirring a pot over the fire. Inside it boiled a mixture of lentils and herbs. "Master," the student said, "why must transformation always look like destruction? Everything in this pot is dissolving." The old poet laughed softly. "You speak exactly like the lentils." Then he recited the parable. "A lentil once cried out while boiling in a pot, 'Why do you torture me? I was peaceful in the earth, safe inside the field. Now you drown me, heat me, break me apart.' The cook replied, 'You were never meant to remain a seed. If I leave you as you are, no one is nourished.' The fire is not punishment. It is preparation." Then the cook added something the student did not expect. Every stage of existence complains about the next one. The seed fears becoming food. The food fears becoming blood. The blood fears becoming spirit. In other words, every transformation feels like death from the inside. Now the occult point. Your bad habits are not random. They are guardians at the cave entrance. They exist to keep you from meeting what would burn your old identity. Think of the moment you try to sit in silence. Instantly, the mind produces an emergency. Check the phone, open a tab, eat something, replay an argument, plan the future, fix yourself. This is not laziness. This is the ego defending its throne. The hermetic texts describe it as 7 veils over the inner sun, not literal fabric, psychic layers. Conditioning, the borrowed shoulds that shape your life. Trauma, the armor you call personality. Ideology, beliefs you never tested, yet obey. Memory, the past looping like a spell. Desire, endless wanting that keeps you restless. Aversion, pushing away what is actually present. Ignorance, the core mistake, believing the mask is the face. Remove those veils and the sun appears. But each veil is glued to a comfort. So the psyche offers substitutes. Dopamine, distraction, drama, anything but the fire. So how did the old practitioners approach this fire without destroying themselves? The manuals of the Persian hermetic circles always began the same way. Enter the laboratory in darkness. Not metaphorically, literally. The seeker was instructed to sit in a quiet room at night, spine upright, body relaxed but alert. The posture was not ritualistic decoration. They believed the spine acted as a conduit, an axis between earth and sky. Then came the first operation, the bellows of the furnace, breath. Slow inhalation through the nose, expanding the abdomen. A brief stillness at the bottom of the breath, as if holding air inside a sealed vessel. Then a gradual exhale through the mouth, like a blacksmith blowing on hidden embers. This breathing had a psychological purpose. Each cycle disturbed the sediment of the unconscious. Memories surfaced. Irritations appeared. Emotions long ignored began to move. To beginners, this felt like failure. But the alchemists insisted. When the chamber becomes uncomfortable, the work has finally started. After several minutes of this breathing, the manuals instructed the seeker to move attention to a very precise location. the quiet space behind the breastbone. Not the sentimental heart of romance, but what the Islamic mystics called the subtle heart, the interior chamber where awareness seems to gather when you feel grief, love, or longing. The Persian philosophers described this point as a seed of light wrapped in shadow. Jung, centuries later, would describe something similar when speaking about the self, the organizing center of the psyche that exists deeper than the ego. At first, nothing happens. The mind complains. The body fidgets. Old worries try to reclaim attention. But if awareness remains steady, something unusual appears. Not a vision, not a mystical spectacle. Rather, a quality of warmth, almost like the memory of sunlight felt through the chest. The alchemists warned, do not chase it. Do not try to intensify it. Simply recognize it. Because the moment you grasp for it, the ego returns to the throne. Here the tradition becomes even more specific. They taught that the inner sun is not activated by force, but by devotion through attention. In Sufi language, ishq, the burning love that keeps turning toward the beloved. Where attention goes, wrote Hakim Sadr al-Din, life follows. So the practice continues like this. On the inhale, imagine you are drawing a thin stream of heat down the central channel, crown to spine, into the heart chamber. Not as fantasy, but as a symbolic instruction to the nervous system. On the exhale, imagine that heat spreading outward like rays, softly filling the chest, loosening the knot where fear stores itself. This is where people begin to notice something practical. The habits start to look different. The craving still appears, but it loses its sacred authority. The urge is revealed as a veil, not a command. Jung would call this shift disidentification, the ego realizing it is not the whole psyche. And once you are no longer hypnotized by the urge, a new choice becomes possible. But the alchemists warned of a danger that modern spirituality often ignores. Fire alone does not create gold. Fire alone creates desert. This is why every solar symbol in the hermetic tradition is paired with a lunar counterpart. The king and the queen. Sulfur and Mercury. Sun and moon. The inner sun represents active force, clarity, will, the courage to burn illusions. But without its partner, the receptive principle, it becomes tyrannical. Many seekers who discover inner power fall into this trap. They become rigid, inflated, convinced they have seen the truth. Jung described this imbalance as ego inflation, when the psyche mistakes a glimpse of the self for personal superiority. The Persian mystics taught a different balance. After awakening the solar warmth in the chest, the practitioner must cultivate listening awareness, the ability to receive experience without controlling it, like the moon reflecting the sun without competing with it. Fire gives direction. Water gives depth. Only when both exist does transformation become creative instead of destructive. Once this balance begins to form, something subtle but decisive changes. The inner work no longer remains confined to meditation. It begins to leak into ordinary life. The hermetic texts called this stage albedo, the whitening. After the darkness of nigredo, perception slowly clears. Not because the world changes, but because the observer inside you becomes less fragmented. Suddenly the old mechanisms reveal themselves in real time. You notice the impulse to escape discomfort with distraction. You notice the reflex to defend your ego in conversation. You notice the small lies told to protect a fragile identity. Before, these patterns operated automatically. Now they appear almost like actors on a stage. Jung believed this moment was essential for individuation. Consciousness begins to separate from the mask, the persona constructed to survive society. The alchemists would say something simpler. The smoke clears, and the sun finally begins to illuminate the room. This is the point where many people become confused. They expect that inner light will eliminate struggle, but the masters insisted. The sun does not erase darkness. It makes it visible. So the cravings may still arrive. The anxiety may still rise. The old habit might still knock at the door. The difference is that now you can see the mechanism, a sensation in the body, a story in the mind, a desperate reach for relief. And once seen clearly, it cannot fully hypnotize you again. A later mystic, Yusuf al-Mizri, wrote, "The veil is strongest when you do not know it is a veil." This is why the practice is less about becoming calm and more about developing inner sight, the capacity to remain present while the psyche begs for anesthesia. In modern terms, you are training the nervous system to stay with discomfort without collapsing into compulsion. In occult terms, you are no longer feeding the false self. You are feeding the fire. When the alchemists spoke of the final stage, rubedo, they did not mean a permanent mystical trance. They meant something far more grounded and far more demanding. Rubedo is the return. After descending into the cave, after facing the shadow, after touching the inner sun, the practitioner must walk back into the ordinary world. Work, relationships, mistakes, boredom, conflict. The same landscape as before. But now the compass is different. The old texts say the gold must be circulated. In other words, whatever clarity you discovered must express itself in action. How you speak, how you treat people, how you handle anger, how you face temptation. If the inner sun remains only a private meditation experience, the work is incomplete. The true sign of transformation is surprisingly simple. You begin to act from center instead of reaction. And slowly, habits that once felt impossible to break begin to dissolve. Not through force, but because the person who needed them is disappearing. There is a story told in the old circles about a hermit who spent years polishing a brass mirror in solitude. When it finally shone like gold, he carried it into the marketplace, expecting admiration. But people walked past him, indifferent. Some mocked him. Some didn't even look. He returned to his teacher furious. "I did the work. Why does the world not recognize it?" The teacher replied, "You polished your mirror, but you demand that those whose mirrors are still coated in dust see themselves in it. That is not your job. Your job is only to keep it bright. This is the final secret of the inner sun. You don't awaken it to become special. You awaken it to become real, to stop living as a negotiation with fear, appetite, and social hypnosis." So here is the question to carry like a private koan. If a sun has been burning in your chest since before your first memory, what habit, what excuse, what later, what permission are you still waiting for? Will you circle the flame and collect concepts? Touch the edge and collect scars? Or become the silent one who finally enters the fire and is no longer ruled by the old self at all?